Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pizza Legends Battle Series. This video is going to be all about battle statuses. Statuses in battle are temporary, quirky bits of behavior that affect a combatant's performance. In this video, we're going to implement two different statuses, one that causes the casting pizza to recover a little bit of HP after every single move, and one that might cause the casting pizza's move to fail altogether. By the end of this, you'll have the examples you need to create statuses of your own. Reminder that the full playlist is linked below, along with code starting points if you missed anything. Be sure to subscribe for the whole series. Let's get started. We are talking about statuses today, so let's go ahead and start our battle with maybe the combatant having a status. So we'll take our player one here, and instead of status being null, we're gonna have it be an object instead. That object's gonna have a type on it. So this will be the sort of string identifier of the status. And so we'll say saucy. And we also want the status to expire after a few turns. And so I want to say expires in 3, meaning 3 turns from now. The saucy status, by the way, means that this pizza is going to recover a little bit of HP after every submission that it does. So I use a move and then I get a little bonus recovery. Now we need to update our scoreboards to actually show the status that's on each pizza. So if it's null, we can just leave it blank, just like it is now. But if there is a status there, we want to see it. So let's pop over to combatant.js and find our element updater method. Here it is, update. We're doing HP, XP, the level and stuff, but we're not doing status yet. So we'll say update status, give us some more room here. We're going to pull our status element here. So status element is going to be within the HUD element. We're going to query select combatant status. If we come up here, we can see that in the markup right here at the bottom. It's this paragraph. Now we can say if this.status, meaning what's on the combatant config, we want to go ahead and show that element. So status element, we'll say the inner text is going to be the name of the status. So that's this.status.type. We're not going to show that expiring info, but we could if you want. You just have to add another text node there. And then we're going to make sure that the element is displayed. So we'll say display is going to be block. We need to make sure that we're handling the reverse case too, right? So if status comes in, but now it's null, maybe we had a status before, but now we don't. We want to make sure that that element gets cleared out. So I'll take these two rules and adjust them. So inner text, if we don't have a status, is going to be back to empty. Then we'll go ahead and say display none. So that element's not showing up anymore. Now when we load the battle, we can see that Saucy is appearing here. And this character still has no status, so that's working good. Doesn't look that beautiful, but we'll go ahead and style it later. For now, let's just get the Saucy status working. Now, so far, we've been putting events in the battle by using each action's success array. And so up here, remember, in our turn cycle, we're iterating through the resulting events, which for now we're just using action.success. For us to tack on these extra recovery events for the Saucy status, we need to actually have a different loop, one that happens later, after the dust is settled from the original submission. So down here, before we switch whose turn it is, we're going to also check for post events. In this game, we're going to be able to get by with just post events, but the basic idea is that this is sort of like a area in the life cycle of a turn. So you could have pre-events too, you could have post events, whatever kind of effect you're going for in the moves that you're creating, you may need to add more events following this kind of pattern. But for now, we're just going to do this post event here. So let's add some comments here. Really what this means is that we are going to do things after your original turn submission. And we're going to create a method on the combatants themselves that sort of retrieve these possible post events for us. So I'll say post events is going to be equal the caster.get post events. And then we're going to go ahead and iterate through them. So again, with a classic for loop here, so we stay in scope of our async function, we'll go ahead and iterate through all the post events and await each one, just like we did with the regular success events. So it's a little repetitive, but it's going to be okay. We'll say event is going to, we're going to spread in our post event, the one that we're on now, whatever I is. And then we also want to include our submission, our action, our caster, and our target, just in case we need any of that stuff. And again, that looks the exact same as what we have up here. And now we're going to await the results. So await this dot on new event, passing in that event. Let's pop over to the combatant now and add that method. So down here, I'm going to add a new method called get post events. And by default, it's going to just return an empty array. So it's always given us an array back. It just was probably usually going to be empty. But now we're going to handle the case where maybe we have a status and we want to include some of those saucy recovery events. So I'll say if this.status, and it might be null, and so we want to use the question mark here for optional chaining, type is saucy, then we want to return something else instead. And what we're going to return, again, are just battle events. So we'll do one type that's text message. You can make this say whatever you want. I like feeling saucy. And then we're going to add an actual state change so that we get the benefits of that HP recovery. So I'll say state change, recover this time. That's new for us. We've only seen damage so far. We're going to recover 5. And then we're also going to include a little bit just to make sure that we do the recovery on the caster. Now we're going to add some code that handles this recover case. By default, it's going to want to do that on the target. But for our saucy HP recovery, we want to make sure that the caster, the move, is the person that, or the pizza, that receives the HP recovery. And so we're going to include this on caster true flag. There's another way you can work this system where this move itself is an action rather than just being kind of random events that are in the combatant here. And that way it could go through the pipeline with the caster as the target. I've approached it that way before, and it does work really well, but it is more complicated. And so for this tutorial series, we're going to keep it a little bit simpler, but we may explore augmenting that in future, more advanced videos. But this is going to work great for now. Let's go ahead and fire up our state change event. So battle event, we want to find our state change and be handling that possible recovery in HP. So here out of the event, we'll pull recover. We'll add a new case, just like damage. Now in here, we don't want to assume target or caster. We want to go ahead and look at that flag on the event, see if we have that on caster event. Again, this way, by not assuming the caster or assuming the target, we have more flexibility on who should receive the recovery. So we want to calculate the new HP of this person. So we'll say new HP is going to be whose HP plus the recover amount. But we don't want to go over our max. So if new HP is greater than whose.max HP, then we want to go ahead and floor, or, just reset the new HP to be who.max HP. That way we can never go over the top. Finally, we'll run our update method on this person, passing in that new HP. And there is one little goof here. If we go back to turn cycle in the post events loop, we want to make sure the target is submission.target. I thought I was destructuring that, but I was not yet. Okay, let's fire this up. The battle is starting, and then Slice Samurai will use his move, womp. And then after that, we get the post events coming through. So feeling saucy, that's text message. Here comes the HP recovery. Bloop, little increase there. And then now we're on to the next caster. And notice that the enemy here did not get the post events because they did not have the saucy status. Now we know Saucy's not going to be here forever. It expires in 3 turns or so. So let's go ahead and figure out how we can downtick that and eventually have it disappear and fall off. So I'm back here in combatant.js, and now I want to just clean up the file a little bit and make it a little prettier. But now we're going to add a new method called decrement status. And what that's going to do is if we have a status applied to this combatant, we're going to go ahead and downtick that number by 1. If that number then reaches 0, we're going to rip the status off the combatant and then show a text message that's like status expired, something like that, so that the player knows what happened. So by default, we're just going to return null here, nothing. So here we'll say if this.status, and again, it might not be there, so optional chaining, .expires in is greater than 0. We want to go ahead and subtract 1. And now, if this number is now 0, we can go ahead and rip our status off. So this update status is null, and then we're going to return a text message event. So type text message, and the text can be status expired. Bonus material here, if you wanted to take the challenge, technically you know which status expired, so you could change the message to be like no longer spicy or something because you know that from the status here. Feel free to take on that challenge if you want the message to be a little bit more amped up. Now let's go into our turn cycle and start using this decrementer. And so right after we're done with the post events, we'll check for a status expire. And so we'll run the method on the caster to run it, but we want to make sure that we're potentially capturing that expired message. So we'll say expired event equals that. And then if we have an expired event, so if that came back with the text message event and not null, we're going to go ahead and await that event so that the player can see it. So we'll say on new event, pass it in that expired event. You could also return an array of events if you wanted it to be more of like a sequence or maybe multiple messages that show up, something like that, but you'd probably need to refactor to include one of these loops. For now, we're just dealing with one message. I don't think our pizzas would actually survive 3 turns at this point, so let's go back to the battle and just configure Saucy to expire in 1 turn. Which, by the way, configuring the initial state of combatants like that is a really fast and easy way to test all the possibilities, so I like working like this a lot. Now when I load up the screen, battle's starting, we do womp once, feeling saucy, and now it should expire. There we go, status expired. And we see that the status has fallen off the scoreboard here. That's good, so we know that the state has been updated, everything is good. The cycle will just continue as normal now. So we've seen the journey of having a status and then having it fall off and expire, but how did it get there in the first place? Let's go ahead and explore creating a new action type that actually sets statuses on these pizzas. So let's pop over to our actions file, and so far we only have one action. We're gonna change that now. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this over and make one called Saucy Status. I kind of like to decouple the IDs of the actions from the actual name of it. That way you can translate it easier. Or if you decide to like rename something when you're halfway through making the game, it's just a matter of changing the string rather than having like the name tethered to the ID. But we'll call this one Tomato Squeeze. And we can keep our text message. We'll go ahead and remove the animation from this one. We'll make a different animation type later on in this video. And now for our state change, we're not doing damage here, we're setting a status. And so I'm just gonna say status on here, and then we wanna give it the exact object that we wanna copy onto the combatant. So we'll say type saucy, and then here we can expires in 3 turns. And now say you wanted maybe like an upgraded move that was like super saucy, you could have, you know, saucy status 2, super tomato squeeze, and then play with the value here. So if you want to play with making more powerful moves that only certain characters have or that you have to like unlock somehow, that's a good way to do it. And so now let's pop over to state change and augment our code to support having a status key here. So over to battle event, we'll find our state change here. Under recover, let's add a new case for status. So if status comes through, we can take our same concept of who, let's move it up here actually because we're going to be able to reuse it here. We're going to be able to say who update status, and then we want to copy over status. And we're using the spread operator here to basically protect us from mutating the actual action itself. And so just by copying all the status keys over from the status object, we can go ahead and modify, like down ticking this number without actually accidentally modifying the base action here. That would be bad. And now we also want to handle the case where if status is null, in the future we're going to have things like recovery items that can maybe take the status value and directly reset it to be null without needing it to expire with the turn count and all that. And so we'll just handle that type here. So in that case, we just want to handle it and we'll say status is null. Now that our state change is set up and ready to go, let's go ahead and change our pizza hero combatant to use this status setting move instead. So we'll go over to actions and we'll grab the key of our saucy move. And then for us to configure our pizza to use it, we need to go to our pizza dex, which is pizzas.js. You see that our hero pizza type right now is one of these slice samurais, and his first action is damage 1. Its first action is damage 1. And so we want to use saucy status instead. And so now with 2 moves in the array, technically the pizza knows how to use 2 different moves. But again, our submission menu code, we set it up in the previous video to just grab the first one. So let's reset our combatants to both be blank, just making sure they start with no status. And then we'll fire this up. I've reloaded the battle here. Say Slice Samurai uses tomato squeeze, so that part's working. It sets the status correctly on Call Me Kale, the enemy. Call Me Kale uses Womp. And then Call Me Kale gets the Feelin' Saucy benefit. Now, of course, this is funny, right? Because Tomato Squeeze is supposed to be a positive status move that we use on ourselves. So let's edit the code to actually have the status get set on the caster instead. back in the code here. One way to certainly achieve that would be to reuse the same piece we set up for that HP recovery, which would be to like say on caster here, true. The only bummer with this approach is that if we definitely wanted to extend the game later, that maybe you could use this move on a teammate instead of definitely yourself, we'd be kind of stuck here because we're really saying on caster. And so what we're going to do is take this out. It's cool that we have that feature and it's handy in places, but in some cases we may want something more like a target type. We'll say friendly. So things like positive moves and items can opt into this target type friendly, which will basically tell the system you can use this on teammates or yourself. Let's pop over to our state change now. So battle event, state change. We're going to augment this code a little bit. So we'll say who is going to start with this check on the caster, but if the action target type is friendly, we can say who is the caster in this place. Right now, we're not letting you choose a teammate, but in the future, when we add that, we can go ahead and change this out. And let's just make sure our action comes in here. And let's see what it does. Okay, battle starting. Slice Samurai uses Tomato Squeeze. This time, it affects Slice Samurai. And then he immediately gets the Feelin' Saucy benefit. So now going forward, when we add in more friendly facing moves, all we need to do is include this value, this key in value on the action. That'll be really nice for recovery moves and items later. So now we're going to move on to our second status of the day, and that's the Clumsy status. While Saucy was a positive move, Clumsy is going to be a negative move, where when you have a Clumsy pizza, it's going to be able to choose its move like it normally would, but there's going to be a small chance that that move's actually going to end up doing nothing. So if you've played a game like Pokemon before, this is going to be like being paralyzed or missing. So while we're in here, let's go ahead and add the move that's going to set this Clumsy status. We'll copy over Saucy status because it's really going to be really similar. This is going to be called Clumsy status. And we'll call it olive oil, like you're spraying someone with olive oil. And now, instead of setting Saucy, we're going to set Clumsy. So it's just a matter of changing that string. We can even add some drama here. If we do another text message that's like target is slipping all around. So let's check out the turn cycle and just look at how this is going to work. Remember that we are just currently grabbing these success events of whatever action is used, but now we want to introduce the idea that maybe we're not going to end up using the success actions. Maybe something else is going to happen instead. And so the way I like to think about this is the caster might replace the actions. Whether it's a good thing or not, it's going to happen at the caster level. So we'll say caster get replaced events. We're going to pass in the success events like this. And how this method's going to work is that we're going to have some logic that will look at the situation of the caster. And if there's nothing to replace, we're just going to go ahead and give back whatever we were given in the first place, kind of like a pass-through check. So let's define this on our combatant. We've got get post events. Right above that, we'll do get replaced events. And that's given original events. And then again, we'll default to just returning that array. So here, let's check the case if we're clumsy right now. So I'll say if this.status has a type and it's equal to clumsy, we want to return, say, a text message. And the text is going to be something silly like the name of the combatant flops over. We could also add like silly animation or something here that maybe makes the pizza shake or something. But right now we'll just leave it to this. This is going to happen every single turn, though, that this pizza is clumsy. And so we need to introduce some kind of element of randomness. So let's pop over to our utilities, because we're actually going to be using randomness a bit here, or we potentially could. We could sprinkle it all over the place, really. But I'm going to add a new method in our utils that's called random from array. That's going to take in an array and then just randomly give us back one of the values in the array. So a quick usage of how we can use this kind of thing, going into our combatant. When we check for clumsy, we're also going to say, and random from array, utils.random from array. And then we're just going to give it an array of Boolean values. And so I'll make this like 33% by saying true, false, false. So you could play and balance with this by changing the values here, the probability of it. But basically, if you're clumsy and the random picker chooses the true value, then your moves will get replaced with this stream here, this array here. So any state changing or other stuff you intended to do with your original move, that's all going to get swallowed. It's going to use this instead. If you wanted to get crazy and go even further, maybe you could extend this so that the combatant could have like an upgrade on it, and the upgrade might affect the probability of the clumsy status happening, that kind of thing. Now let's remove the probability for a second just so we can see this working. So this will always land on true. And similarly, just for testing, we're going to open up our battle and make sure that our hero, pizza player 1, starts with a status of type clumsy. So when we boot up the game, so now we have clumsy as our initial state. And instead of using the move that Slice Samurai wanted to use, instead we get this flops over. So nothing happened. So this is working great. Let's go ahead and back out some of this stuff. So let's take out the initial state. Let's put our probability back in. Now everything is a little more fair and balanced again. And now let's test that the clumsy setting move is working properly. So we'll go to our actions file. We're going to grab the ID of the clumsy setting move. We're going to go to our pizza and have that be the first move that Slice Samurai uses. When we load it up, we can see that the olive oil move correctly sets clumsy on the target, so that's great. Now we have moves that set our statuses. Now as a bonus to wrap up this video, we're going to add one more of those battle animation types to make this move a little bit more exciting. What we're going to do now is create a color orb that's going to like rise up from this pizza and then go and smack the other pizza. And because we're talking about olive oil here, we can even make that orb be like a yellowish color. It's going to be awesome. Back in Actions.js here, I'm going to channel what we did up here for the want move. And in our clumsy status move, I'm going to add a type animation. We need a key to look up the animation function. And we're going to call this one glob. We're also going to take the opportunity to pass in more information to the animation that we can use to configure it. So say we want to make this animation and reuse it in a different context later, but maybe just pass in a tweak or so to just make it a little bit different. We can do that with this pattern. And so here, this glob animation is also going to accept a color. I'm going to paste in this like gnarly yellowy green hex color that I just came up with. Hopefully it should look something like olive oil. So when we're done with this, we'll see the text message, we'll see the olive oil animation, and then the state change, and then the final text message. Again, these are really the building blocks that you can use to build out whatever kind of storytelling in the battle that you're going for. So highly encourage you to play around with them like this. Let's take our glob key here and open up the file called battle animations. Currently, we only have one, async spin. Let's add another one. This is going to be async glob. And it'll take in the same event so we can pull values off it, and then an on-complete callback to call when the animation should continue with the battle cycle. Now, before we start filling in the JavaScript for the function here, let's talk through the CSS that's really going to bring this animation to life. So I'll go over to our battle CSS, and at the bottom is a section where we're doing all of our animations. I'm going to add another section here. It's going to be called glob orb. Previously, we took our pizza elements and kind of flung them at each other. And so we applied like battle spin right on the pizza itself. We're going to look at an example here where this animation type is going to like add a new element to the screen and then animate that around. So you don't always have to be limited to playing around with the pizzas. You can add different things to the screen and then animate those around too. So we're going to create an SVG circle on the screen, and that circle is going to live inside this absolutely positioned container, which is called glob orb. We're going to set up a keyframe here, battle glob right, that's basically going to take that container, squish it down a little bit with scaling, move it upwards and forward a little bit, so 10, -80, and then also scale it up to its full size. And then it's going to move it to the target's location, and then it's going to stay at that target location, see that the positions are the same here, but then it's going to expand, and it'll also fade out. So it's supposed to emulate like dropping a bunch of liquid on something. And then finally, we have a class that just sets the starting position of this glob and then applies that animation. And again, just like we did before in the previous video, these are all set up for the right direction, but we need to also bring in the left direction. So here comes that. Same concept, but all the values are tweaked to be left facing. Now with the CSS classes in place, we can go ahead and start filling out our animation function. First, I'm going to pull out the caster from the event just to make the code a little bit cleaner to read in a second here. And then we're going to create that div that our orb is going to sit inside. And so we'll say document create element, given it type div. We'll add that glob orb class that we created the CSS for, and then we'll look at the caster's team to figure out should that be the right-facing class or the left-facing class. Now we'll add some inner HTML that contains our SVG and the circle inside it. And here in the circle color, we can say event.color for the fill. And what that's going to do is look at our color in the config. Remember in actions.js, we passed in our awesome olive oil color. So that if you wanted to reuse this animation, you could like just change the color here, and then that would be used instead. That especially might be handy for something like a particle effect, where you want to keep the same animation but just change the color. Clean this up for a second. Now the CSS we just wrote is going to want to fire off an animation right away because this class is going to have that animation defined on it. And so what we want to do is add an event listener that when that animation is complete, we can just remove this div from the screen altogether. Kind of like a projectile. I mean, it is sort of a saucy, liquidy projectile. It's going to enter the screen, do its thing. When it's done doing its thing, we don't need it anymore. So it can just be removed from the DOM. So to kick this off, we need to add the element to the DOM. And so we want to do that in the same layer, the same level that the pieces are on. So we'll do .battle, which is where the pizzas are, and then append child div. And just like we saw with the previous animation, we want the battle cycle to continue basically when the glob collides with the other pizza. So we're going to use our same kind of waiting pacing technique that we did before. So utils.wait. This one happens to be around like 820 milliseconds. And then as soon as that's done, we can call our onComplete function. Let's see how all this stuff landed. Okay, I've loaded up the battle, and now Slice Samurai uses olive oil. Here comes our new animation. So the position looked pretty good. The color looks okay to me. Let's see it one more time. And there we go. Now back in battle animations, just for a second, just for a note, these are the only two real ones we're gonna do in this series, but I highly encourage you to take this concept of setting up an animation function and then playing with the different elements on the screen within that function before resolving it to sort of bring the elements to life. I think the more you have fun with tweaking these values and making the elements do different things, it really adds a lot to the battle scene. A stretch goal would certainly be to have a unique animation for every move in your game, but that can be a lot of scope, and so that's where configuring little tweaks like the color here can really come in handy. Now in the next video, we're going to start thinking about some UI that the player pizzas can use to actually choose the move that they want to use. Right now our submission menu is just defaulting to the first one in the list, but what does it look like if we want to be able to choose the damaging move or the clumsy status move? And we're going to have team inventories and items on the way, items that can recover statuses and recover HP, that kind of thing. We're already really set up for that, so we're going to go ahead and fill that out. All of that is coming up soon. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. As always, if you're getting value out of this, please hit that like button, subscribe for the whole series. Remember to join us in Discord if you're working on a game or have questions about this project. And finally, there's a Ko-fi donation link if you want to help support the channel. There are some supporter benefits on the way that I'm really excited about. More info on that soon. Thank you so much. Catch you next time.